Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another Canadian Soldier Reacts 2, and today it's going to be the U.S. Army Medium Infantry. Now, I've watched probably about half of this, and they say it's about the strikers. It's really not. It's more about what they're calling the medium infantry, and to be honest, it's looking to me very much like the Canadian version of mechanized infantry, which is what I was. So I was, for 12 years from 1987 to 1998, I was in the 1st Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment, which at the time was one of the only SSF battalions in the entire Canadian Forces. And I ended up as a section commander. And I was deployed overseas several times, including the first Gulf War. So what I want to do is just kind of compare and contrast what they have here today with what we had back in the 80s and 90s. So let's get into it.
Medium force focused on intra-theater mobility and delivering massed infantry forces with decent fire support. The Stryker infantry are perhaps the least...
Okay, first of all, so let's talk a little bit about the Stryker Armored Infantry Fighting Vehicle, AIFV. I assume that's what they're calling it. So that, when I first started out, we had a 6-wheeled Piranha chassis, which was called the Grizzly. And we used that for most of my career. Just at the very end of my career, they were phasing those out for the 8-wheeled Piranha chassis, which is pretty much exactly the same thing as you see with the Stryker there. And I believe they came with a 30 millimeter main gun and then a pintle mount for a C6 on the crew commander's cupola, I believe. Now the Grizzlies, they would have, I think, twin... No, they would have 50 cal mounted coaxial with a C5 GPMG, which was essentially, it was a 7.62, very similar to the American 30 cal GPMG.
Understood compared to their light and mechanized counterparts. In this video, we're going to dive into the current organization of the U.S. Army's Stryker.
So that looks a lot closer to what the RCDs, the Royal Canadian Dragoons, the tankers, would have had. I honestly can't remember the names of all the ones that they had. I think the main gun on theirs was somewhere in the 80 millimeter range. I can't really remember. But a lot of the rest of this looked pretty similar. That looks like a 30 mil, where we would have had a 50 cal, and then the smoke dischargers. That looks like it might be a fording snorkel, maybe?
Brigade combat teams, with a focus on the infantry rifle.
So that actually looks very much like a Carl G, which the Canadian, when I get out in 98, the Canadian Forces still carried, I think we carried one per platoon.
Company, the attached support available to it, how they're used, and their limitations. I'm your host Brendan, and this is Battle Order. First, I'd just like to thank our Patreon supporters who allow us to cover more works in order. Also, make sure to join hand. The Stryker Brigade Combat Team, or SBCT, is one of 3 types of BCTs, the Basic Deployable Maneuver Unit of the U.S. Army. The brigade fights primarily as dismounted infantry with combined arms support. Stryker infantry or...
So that's pretty much the same as 1RCR. We were technically called mechanized infantry, but we were dismounted far more than we were mounted.
Organically motorized by 8x8 Stryker infantry carriers, offering superior mounted mobility and firepower.
Yeah, so the thing about the wheeled vehicles is they're significantly faster than the tracked vehicles. The other vehicle that we had and used most often was the M113A2. It was a tracked vehicle. We used that more for our anti-armor platoons, our Pioneer platoons for their dozers. And overseas, we would use them sometimes as infantry carriers. So this will go a lot faster on hard surfaces, like a lot faster than an M113 on hard surfaces. But if you get this into bog at all, I've seen so many of these things get stuck. It's not funny.
When compared to lighter infantry BCTs, but a lighter logistical burden and greater deployability when compared to the heavier armored brigade combat teams. With approximately 42 to 4,300 soldiers.
We used to use these all the time when we were doing our attack preps, or more often actually, we'd use them on reconnaissance patrols for objectives.
In the brigade, the Striker Brigade combat team consists of the following: a headquarters and headquarters company with a colonel in command of the brigade.
Yeah, that's the
three
same.
Striker infantry battalions, each under a lieutenant colonel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the brigade level. Yeah, this is interesting. So that would be 3 or 4 infantry battalions, depending on the situation.
A cavalry squadron, providing reconnaissance and fire support.
I'm going to assume that's tankers, and we would have one of those, yes.
A field artillery battalion with 3 batteries of towed 155mm howitzers, for a total.
So we had 120mm towed howitzers.
18 howitzers in the brigade. A brigade engineering battalion, or BEB, with combat engineers, signals, and intelligence support. And a brigade support.
So they'd be separate. You'd have an engineer battalion, and then you would have a signals. Well, so that's interesting too. You'd have a signals squadron, they called them, but each of the units that you see here, they would also have their own signals units. So the signals squadron didn't do anything for, or hardly anything for, any of these. They were more for the brigade level.
Support Battalion, or BSB, providing centralized distribution, medical, and maintenance services.
Yeah, so that would be more logistics and medical for us, but essentially the same thing.
As well as forward support companies attached directly to combat and combat support units in the brigade. The maneuver components of the brigade are its infantry battalions. Each battalion has a headquarters and headquarters company, or HHC, and 3.
Okay, again, so this, he's saying here 3 rifle companies. So again, so this is what I would have been in. And we would have used either Grizzlies or I think Kodiaks or Coyotes. I can never remember what came in, because literally I think we had them for 1 year before I got out. So this would have been the same, except that for probably half my career, we actually had 4 rifle companies. So I was in 1 RCR, and we started out, we had 3. We had Dukes, Bravo, and Charles companies for about 6 years. And then they stood Delta Company back up. And I was actually in Delta Company for several years. Then Echo Company, I'm sure he's going to get into it.
3 rifle companies. Rifle companies are the close combat elements of the infantry battalion, consisting of a headquarters section, 3 rifle platoons, and a mortar section, in addition to habitual.
Okay, so this is where we kind of depart. So yes, we had 3. We had the headquarters section. We had 3 rifle platoons. We didn't have inside the rifle company, a single rifle company. We didn't have a mortar section. We had what was called a heavy weapons det. The heavy weapons det would have carried a bunch of different things. 1 or 2 60mm mortars. And oftentimes the rifle platoons, especially if we were mounted, the rifle platoons would oftentimes have a 60mm mortar with us also. Also, there would be GPMG gunners, or back when we had the C5 GPMG, or when we moved to the C6, both 7.62 machine guns. And we would also have then we would have 1 or possible, no, in a rifle platoon, 1 Carl Gustav. And I think generally that would be about it in the platoons. But then at the I don't know if he's going to get into it. Let me see what else he gets into.
Attachments. Starting from the top, the company comes under the command of a captain, assisted by...
Okay, so what he missed there was at the battalion level. So our rifle companies were Dukes, Bravo, Charles, and Delta. Then Echo Company would have been our combat support company, and that would consist of reconnaissance platoon, signals platoon, anti-armor platoon. Anti-armor platoon would have had, I believe, either 4 or 8 vehicle-mounted tow missile launchers, which could be dismounted, and we did dismount them. Also a mortar platoon, which would have been an 81 millimeter mortar platoon. Again, I believe consisting of 8 81 millimeter mortars. I think that was it. If I'm missing something, I'm sure one of my Army buddies will let me know down in the comments. Because, just so you know, they've let me know every time I've said something wrong. So that would have been Echo Company, and then Foxtrot Company would have been our support company. That would have been our logistics, maintenance, our medical, and our administrative support.
An executive officer ranking first lieutenant who coordinates sustainment for the company.
So we would have a commanding officer, but we didn't call them XOs. We called them 2IC, so Company 2IC, second in command. In fact, everywhere in the Canadian Forces, you'll have a commander of some sort, section commander, platoon commander, whatever, and then you'll have a 2IC. Sometimes platoon at a platoon level, it's a platoon warrant. The warrant officer ranks are completely different in the Canadian military than they are in the American military. And that person, your Company 2IC, would generally be a captain. So the company commander would be a major, and the Company 2IC would be a captain.
Both officers ride in their own Striker ICV,
yes.
Further crewed by a vehicle commander, driver, and radio telephone operator,
yes,
or RTO.
This is all the same.
The commander also gets a Humvee driven by their RTO when the Striker isn't needed.
So when I was in the Canadian Forces, this would have been an Iltis. They are, I think it would take 4 Iltises to make up the size of a Humvee.
Such as in garrison. The HQ also has 2 5-ton cargo trucks towing water trailers.
So with us, that would have been, well, it started out as MLVWs, Medium Logistic Vehicle Wheeled, and then I think it moved to HLVW, which is Heavy Logistical Vehicle Wheeled, which actually looks a lot like this 5-ton vehicle, to be honest.
One carries the company first sergeant, the senior enlisted soldier in the company, a forward signal support.
So with Canadian Forces, that would have been a master warrant officer, or also referred to as the company sergeant major. And I can't remember if he got his own vehicle or if he traveled with the CO or OC. Actually, so with a company, it's with a battalion, it's a CO, commanding officer. With a company, it's an OC, officer commanding. And then there's Company 2IC after that. But so your Company Sergeant Major, I don't think he got his own vehicle. I don't remember.
Support NCO, and a senior combat medic attached from the battalion combat medic section. The other truck carries a supply sergeant and supply specialist. In addition,
so that would have been our stores warrant officer. There was a name for him, and I can't remember what it was now. But he would have been... So the master warrant officer would be equivalent to what you would call the first sergeant, and then what the the stores warrant would be one rank down from him, whatever that is in the American forces.
In addition to these assets, the company will also have a number of attached personnel. First, on deployment, the HQ receives a fire support team, or FIST, mounted in a fire support vehicle from the Field Artillery Battalion. They aid in the coordination.
So in combined arms exercises and operations, yes, we would get exactly the same thing. We would get forward observers from the artillery units.
Of fire support for the company, including brigade artillery, mortars, naval gunfire, and close air support.
We didn't have brigade mortars, though. Every battalion had their own mortars platoon.
The FIST is authorized a fire support officer, or FSO, a fire support sergeant, fire support specialist, and an RTO. The company trains will also have a medical evacuation vehicle and a medical evacuation squad attached from the battalion medical treatment platoon. It's manned by an emergency care sergeant, a trauma specialist, and a driver. Moving on, providing the company with organic indirect fire support is the mortar section, with 2 M11.
So our mortars were, I don't think, ever vehicle mounted. There's no way they'd ever put them in the back of a Grizzly or a Kodiak like that. I'm almost 100% certain, at least while I was in, they would always dismount and they'd set up, which made obviously setting up and tearing down fire and movement a lot more difficult. But man, that's the way we did it.
29 mortar carriers. Each is equipped with a 120mm mortar for mounted fire, as well as a spare 60mm mortar for dismounted operations. The section comes under the leadership of a...
Yeah, so as I said before, there were a bunch of 60mm mortars. They were carried, like, sometimes each section would carry it. Definitely each platoon would carry it. And then once you get out of the platoon level, though, the company level, actually, like I said, sometimes there would be a couple in the company heavy weapons det, but then when you got up into the battalion level, it was 81mm mortars. We didn't have 120mm mortars.
Staff sergeant section leader riding in one carrier, while a sergeant squad leader rides in the other. Each carrier is further crewed by a driver, gunner, assistant gunner, and ammo bearer. And now on to the meat of the company. Each rifle platoon consists of a platoon HQ, 3 rifle squads, and 1 weapons squad.
So in Canada, they're not called squads, they're called sections. And that's pretty much exactly the same. Yeah, 3 rifle sections and then a heavy weapons det.
Platoon HQ, the platoon comes under the overall leadership of a first or second lieutenant, assisted by a platoon sergeant ranking sergeant first.
Yeah, so with in Canada, this would be a warrant officer. That's essentially the equivalent rank to what you're seeing here.
Class. The platoon leader, or PL, has an RTO, providing them with personal dismounted communications.
Yeah, this would happen.
A combat medic will also be attached to the platoon HQ from the battalion combat medic section. Further, a forward observer and newly added forward observer RTO.
So this would be a that would be a master corporal rank there. Sometimes a sergeant, I think.
Are attached from the Field Artillery Battalion to provide the platoon with fire support coordination capabilities. Other personnel, such as interpreters, may also be attached depending on the need. Meanwhile, each rifle squad consists of 9 dismounted personnel and 2 vehicle crew members. In Army doctrine, the rifle squad is the smallest unit that can independently fire and maneuver, with one team acting as a base of fire while another conducts the assault. It comes under the purview of a...
So that didn't happen. No, we would generally assault together, but we could fire and move in 2 dets, essentially. The section commander, which would have been a master corporal, that would have been me, would take 1/2 of the section, and then his 2 IC, generally a corporal, but could also have been Master Corporal Sergeant too. That happens sometimes, but not often. It was supposed to be Master Corporal Sergeant, but that didn't happen often. So we would move that way under command of those 2.
Squad leader, officially a staff sergeant, but often a sergeant in practice, who was armed with an M4A1 carbine.
Yeah, so this was the same with us. So this would be equivalent to a Canadian sergeant, but in practice, a Master Corporal most often would have done this.
The dismounted element then has an Alpha team and a Bravo team, identically organized.
Yeah.
They're both led by a team leader, ranking sergeant officially, but often a senior specialist, who's also armed with a carbine. Each team further
consists... So this is different. So what he just said, that would give you one senior sergeant and two sergeants. We would have just had our equivalent to the senior sergeant take command of half, and then the master corporal take command of the other. Or, as I said, in practice, it would have been a master corporal and a corporal, or possibly two master corporals. But we didn't use the three here. We only used two.
Of an automatic rifleman with an M249 light machine gun, a grenadier armed with a carbine and an M320 40mm grenade launcher, and a rifleman armed with a carbine and an AT-4 disposable anti-tank weapon. Each rifle squad also has a Javelin anti-tank guided missile system.
That was a Javelin? Oh, yeah, okay. That's interesting. So what we had was Carl Gustav's, which is a direct fire open bore weapon.
Available to them with a number of reloads stowed in the left side of the Striker's passenger compartment. The Javelin is the rifle company's main anti-tank weapon and is typically employed by dismounted infantry. Meanwhile, the vehicle team consists of a sergeant vehicle commander and a junior enlisted driver. The former mans the Striker's remote weapon system, identifies targets, and directs the driver. We've been told that in some units, vehicle crews are centralized under a single vehicle squad, under the purview of a senior vehicle commander to coordinate maintenance. However, this is probably less
that generally came under the purview of the Company 2IC, I believe. Or the quartermaster. It was either the Company 2IC or the quartermaster, one of the two. He would take when everyone dismounted, he would take charge of the vehicles and do whatever was necessary at that point.
Practically relevant in combat. The weapon squad, meanwhile, is the platoon's dismounted base of fire. It consists of a squad leader, usually a senior squad leader in the platoon, two M240L medium machine gun teams with a gunner carrying a pistol as a sidearm, and an assistant gunner each. The squad is then rounded out by the vehicle team.
Yeah, I don't think we ever got, well, not ever. A couple of times we got pistols, but not very often at all.
Doctrinally, the gunner should outrank the assistant gunner, but in practice, the assistant gunner is usually senior and directs the gunner's fire. Some units may operate as three-man teams with an additional ammo bearer or a specific team leader, but this is not the case in every unit.
Yeah,
Unlike
this
a
kind
light infantry weapon squad, there are no dedicated anti-tank teams, as rifle squads man those systems when...
Oh, that is a Carl G. That is a Carl G right there. Well, that's interesting. And he's just fired, like he has just pulled the trigger there, because you can see the round just starting to light off. Also, that's interesting. So he's still got his hand on the Venturi lock there. He should have already tapped that Venturi lock, and he should now, he'll call back blast clear, and then as soon, well, yeah, I'm hoping, he should be facing forward. Like, if he's not facing forward already, he should be starting to turn already, because that back blast is no joke.
Necessary. The vehicle the platoon rides in is the M1126 Striker ICV. Currently, most are armed with either an M250 cal heavy machine gun or a Mark 19 automatic grenade launcher on a remote weapon system. However, in the future, the Army intends to equip each rifle platoon with two Striker Dragoons armed with a 30mm autocannon, as well as one with the M2 Browning and one with the Mark 19. Because the turret on the Dragoon is...
Yeah, like I said, I can't remember if we had... I definitely know there were 30mm. I just don't remember if we had them or if the RCDs, the Dragoons, Royal Canadian Dragoons, the tankers had them. If we didn't have the 30mm, we definitely have the 50 cals.
Is remote, mounted over the passenger compartment with no internal turret basket. The passenger capacity isn't diminished. Although armed with an autocannon, the Striker Dragoon is not intended to be a wheeled equivalent to the Bradley. There's a reason why the Striker is referred to colloquially as a truck by the infantry. The autocannon does, however, give the...
Oh, this is cool. That is a what's known as a wire cutter. basically, it's just something to ensure that if you run over a wire, see, if you run over a high wire, that could easily, if you notice that, travel up the plate there. There's a name for it. Trim vein. Travel up the trim vein, and you can see where the helmet is sitting there. That's the driver's cupola there. It could easily take his head off. And that's why the wire cutter is there, to make sure that any wires that come up get broken and don't decapitate either your driver or your your vehicle commander.
The Striker unit more options during chance contact with mechanized forces, particularly when facing light armored vehicles such as the BMP or BTR, where the 50 cal alone would be an unreliable counter. The four Strikers are divided into
So our 30 cals had a number of different types of rounds. One of them was the tungsten dart discarding sabot round, which was a really nice round. It would fire a 30 millimeter casing, but then it would very quickly discard the outer shell, and you would literally get a finned tungsten dart traveling downrange, and that would be what would take out the vehicle that you were aiming at, or the person if they were unlucky enough to get hit.
2 sections of 2 vehicles each. Section A comes under the command of the platoon leader, while Section B comes under the command of the platoon sergeant. The Strikers without leadership act as wingmen to the leaders. When a leader...
Yeah, so this would be obviously the company commanders, the OC's vehicle, and 2IC's vehicle, and then probably the heavy weapons at that point, or other vehicles as necessary. Like, pretty sure the company signaler traveled with the company commander, if I remember correctly.
Dismounts, a senior vehicle commander takes over command of the section. As for seating, there isn't a specific doctrine for who sits where, so it's all unit dependent. Each vehicle has a vehicle commander station, driver station, 9 passenger seats, and less of a seat but more of just a space behind the driver that an extra person could sit in.
So that's what the book tells you. In practice, it was a lot tighter than that. I mean, we could pack all of those people in there if we really, really needed to, but 90% of the time we were carrying a whole crap load of kit with us too. Those things were so tight and they were so smelly. You would choke yourself out on the diesel fumes in those things. They were just not, well, again, we didn't have the Strikers. We had the Grizzlies or the Kodiaks or whatever else it was. But it was essentially the same thing, and they're just not fun.
It's possible to squeeze in more passengers, but given units are usually under strength, space is not usually an issue. Each vehicle has a vehicle commander and a driver at their respective stations.
Yeah, if you were under strength,
usually the platoon leader will man the squad leader's station in one of the rifle squad vehicles, accompanied by their RTO. The platoon sergeant, meanwhile, will do the same, accompanied by the combat medic, because the platoon sergeant coordinates casualty evacuation. In vehicles with leadership, the squad leader mans the back right air guard hatch, acting as additional security. In vehicles without platoon leadership, the squad leader mans the squad leader's hatch, while a team leader occupies the back right air guard hatch instead. The back left air guard hatch, meanwhile, is manned by a junior soldier. In the weapons squad vehicle, this is often a machine gunner. The remainder of the seats are then filled out by the rest of the squads.
Yeah, so we didn't have as much leadership. The squad leader, or possibly the section commander, or possibly the section 2IC would grab the crew commander's cupola and then would dismount with the section, and then generally the drivers would then be gathered up by, like I said, I think it was the company 2IC or somebody else, and then they would go without any leadership whatsoever. The only times that would be different would be if they were going to be used as fire support. Somebody would have to be left to actually act as fire support.
In the scope of company operations, some of the normal rifle company personnel may be tasked to perform other specific duties. For example, each rifle company is authorized a Raven unmanned aerial vehicle manned by trained personnel to extend the company's reconnaissance capacity. In the newest manuals, there's now the intention to equip the Stryker company with 2 Group 2 UAVs, such as the Scan Eagle. Meanwhile, there seems to be the intention to push Group 1 UAVs, which could include systems like the Raven and smaller UAVs, down to the platoon level. In addition to UAVs, the Army plans to train infantry and maneuver units as Stinger man-pads operators. This is part of a new push to increase maneuver unit air defense capacity, with a refocus on pure conflict.
So this is one of the biggest things. I guess there's 2 really big differences I see between the Canadian forces and the American forces. The first is the American forces are, I think, 20-odd times the size of the Canadian forces. Like, it's nuts how much bigger the American forces are. And then the second is the American forces seem to get much better equipment than the Canadian forces, at least when I was in.
This means 2 soldiers in the rifle company would be designated as a Stinger team in the future. Outside of the rifle company, there are several ways battalion and brigade attachments can augment the company's fighting power.
So that armor that you saw there, that generally would have been used, called standoff armor, basically to try to explode any incoming missiles, whether it be a tow missile or a Stryker or a Carl G round. Explode that further back from the actual armor in the hopes of being able to dissipate the explosion before it actually hit the armor, and then hopefully the slope would deflect that.
One is the Brigade Cavalry Squadron's weapons troop, consisting of a headquarters section with a Stryker ICV, 3 ATGM carrier platoons of 3 vehicles each, and 3 Stryker MGS platoons with 4 vehicles each. There are a number of...
Alright, so this would have been RCDs for us, tankers, Royal Canadian Dragoons, a completely different unit, a completely different occupation. I had a bunch of friends there, but I was not a tanker, so I can't really speak intelligently on what they had.
Ways that the weapons troop can be employed. When split up and attached in support of maneuver units, individual platoons provide direct fire support to the infantry battalion and or rifle company.
Well,
the exact task organization will depend on the mission, but doctrine for habitual...
I believe the caliber of the main gun was somewhere in the 80mm range. I think. If somebody knows what they were with the Cougars, that's really what was being used. That was a 6-wheel variant that when I was in. And then with whatever the new variant was, whether it's Kodiak or something else. Anyway, if you know what the tanker's main gun size was, let me know down in the comments.
Attachment has each infantry battalion share one of each type platoon with the brigade cavalry troops. For the infantry battalions, attachments could take the form of pure platoons or mixed platoons with both MGS and ATGM carriers.
Yeah,
the ATGM carrier provides infantry with a long-range anti-tank capability with its 12 tow missiles, 2 at the ready. The Stryker...
Okay, so we had something similar, but each infantry battalion had a platoon of these, and we didn't have 2 tow missiles. We had 1 tow missile at any particular time loaded. I think we carried 10 with 1 loaded, if I remember correctly. And yeah, it didn't look exactly like that. Obviously they've got the 2 there, and yeah, but other than that, it was essentially the same.
MGS, meanwhile, is an assault gun, focused primarily at engaging structures, fortifications, emplacement, and personnel. It has a limited self-defense capability against tanks with its heat and APFS DS rounds, which, with its 105mm, would be effective against less than modern tanks. While ammo load likely varies mission to mission, the standard ammo load for the MGS...
So the main battle tank of the Canadian Forces is the Leopard 2. and that's a tracked vehicle. It goes significantly slower than the Piranha chassis vehicles, the wheeled vehicles. But it also packs significantly more punch. I've worked with them a couple of times, but not often. More often, we would work with the wheeled vehicles because the tanks had a hard time keeping up with us.
His main gun is 4 rounds of high explosive anti-tank, 2 rounds of armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot, 10 rounds of high explosive plastic, which is the American version of HESH intended primarily for anti-structure work, and 2 rounds of canister shot for work against personnel in the open or behind light cover. Other force multipliers available to the infantry include combat engineers attached from the BEB. This may include a mobility squad mounted in an M1132 engineer support vehicle. This unit provides obstacle clearing, lane marking, mine detection, mine rolling, and mine clearing line charge services to...
So again, so the engineers did all of that, and they did a lot more, actually. They did all kinds of explosive work and all kinds of construction work. And actually, that reminds me, that's the 5th combat support platoon that I didn't talk about in the beginning. We had what was called a pioneer platoon, which was essentially an infantry combat engineer. Now, obviously, the pioneer platoon, I was actually qualified as a pioneer, passed the course. We weren't as qualified as the engineers by any stretch, but we would provide the immediate engineering support, combat engineering support to the battalion. It was just luxury when we got a combat engineering battalion attached to us because they had all the kit.
Maneuver elements. Depending on the mission, other engineering units may be earmarked to support rifle companies. Meanwhile, for a battalion, sniper teams may be attached to rifle companies to provide longer...
Our sniper teams, and I'll say a sniper in air quotes, because there were very few actual snipers in the Canadian Forces. The course to get your sniper qualification was extremely difficult. However, we did have members who were deployed as snipers who would, it was a C3 at the time, bolt action, 7.62, and we would typically fire at about a kilometer-ish range. And that would typically be your top marksman in the battalion who would be assigned those roles.
Range precision fires.
Oh, in recce platoon. So sniper det was part of recce platoon.
Each battalion has a squad of 3 sniper teams of 3 men each. These teams may employ a number of different weapon systems, including anti-materiel rifles, such as the M107 50 cal, sniper rifles like the M24 bolt-action rifle, and marksman rifles like the M110 or a new M110A1. Other members of the team may be armed with carbines, one possibly with an M320 grenade launcher, and act as a spotter and security. In terms of use, the striker infantry provide a number of advantages over light and mechanized infantry, but also have a number of limitations. For example, because striker infantry are organically motorized, they're capable of faster and more independent moves than the light infantry with better protection and firepower. An example of the striker unit's intra-theater mobility was an exercise at the Sugar-Gordon Urban Warfare Training Facility, where striker infantry were able to arrive on objective 12 hours before an equivalent light infantry unit typically would have, which caught the enemy off balance. The Army now motorizes its light infantry with MRAPs on deployment. However, at the time of the Striker's adoption, the mobility solution for light infantry was the Humvee. But in either case...
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I question the use of a dedicated light infantry battalion now. Because, as I said before, we were what was called at the time mechanized infantry, or some people called us heavy infantry. But essentially, all we did was get to the objective area in those vehicles. And sometimes we were able to to fight in the vehicles. But then as soon as we got there, we basically just dismounted and we became essentially light infantry at that point. So it's a dual role, and the limitations of the light infantry, I really do question why we would continue to have them, because in the mechanized infantry role, if we needed to man pack 10 miles to the objective, we did. But if we didn't have to, then we use the vehicle. So I don't know. It just seems like the best of both worlds to me, the mechanized infantry.
Case, the Striker is able to ferry an entire infantry squad and more equipment in a single vehicle. Further, motorization in IBCTs is external support. Strikers with their organic vehicle crews and fewer vehicles per rifle company did not suffer as much by leaving soldiers behind to provide security after dismount. Striker units are still not as strategically mobile as light
hold on just a second. Let him finish this.
Infantry, meaning an infantry brigade combat team, such as the 173rd or one of the 82nd Airborne brigades, is capable of being delivered to a crisis quicker. However, Striker units are still superior in this respect to armored brigade.
Well, you know what? I would question that comment, because as a mechanized infantry battalion, we were on 2 days notice to move at all times anywhere in, it was either the world or in Europe. I can't remember which. And that was just our base, 2 days notice to move, period. But that level of preparedness could be dropped to 24 hours notice to move, 8 hours notice to move, 2 hours notice to move, on some notice, and we could be deployed pretty darn quickly. And here's the thing: we could be deployed with our vehicles, assuming we had the transportation. But if we didn't have the transportation, they would just deploy us as light infantry. So again, best of both worlds.
Combat teams, and have a potential use as a middle ground unit that can be deployed faster than the armored forces and with greater firepower and protection than the light infantry. The Striker unit's major advantage over heavier forces is its lighter logistical burden, allowing them to be more flexible and reducing the time it takes to prepare for movement over distance. It also helps during dispersed operations, which Striker units leverage during counterinsurgency operations in Iraq. And, if rapidly deployed,
anywhere where you've actually got roads or hard ground, those things are great. Just don't take them into a bog or a heavy rain.
Striker units don't have to wait as long for logistical support to be delivered, meaning they'd theoretically be able to act sooner. At the same time, Strikers have clear limitations when compared to the ABCTs, those being
they do not have anywhere near the armor protection as any of the main battle tanks. A single Leopard 2 could take out probably every single one of them if in a one-on-one, shoot 'em out slugfest. We would have to get very, very creative. And I'm not even certain we could get a full kill on a main battle tank. We would have to go for either a turret kill or a mobility kill, a track kill. There's the only thing that we had, and this is why actually we had it. The only thing that we had to even that playing field was our anti-armor platoon, and that was the TOW missiles. And I'll tell you, a good TOW team can take out anything within 4.5 kilometers on the battlefield that I know of. So we would definitely rely on them. And if you didn't have that, then you had to get very, very creative. Otherwise, main battle tank's a tough nut to crack.
protection, armament, and cross-country mobility. Unlike Bradleys, the Striker cannot reliably fight through to the objective, at least not when facing a peer foe with heavy weapons. And they're not reliable tank killers without dismounted support.
Yes.
Strikers have to use terrain to stay out of range or sight of enemy anti-tank systems until the infantry assault. Strikers without force multipliers are generally...
And the infantry is needed for support of those vehicles. Like, those vehicles are supporting you as a fire base, but you're also supporting them because they're a tank magnet. They're a missile magnet. They're a round magnet. Like, somebody sees one of those things on the battlefield, they're going to be gunning for it. You, as the infantry, you have to be able to identify those and take them out before they can take your guys out. So it's definitely a bit of a chess game there.
Predicted to perform poorly against a mechanized enemy in a prepared position if employed like Bradleys are. However, the Striker is not intended for the Bradley mission set, and poor performance under that condition is predictable.
I'll be honest, I don't really know the difference, the main difference between a Striker and an M2 Bradley. So if you're an American have information on that, please let me know down below in the comments what the main difference is between the Striker and the Bradley.
Striker has an advantage over the Bradley, and that is its focus on the infantry. Depending on the unit and situation, Bradleys can often be employed as light tanks essentially, with comparatively small complements of infantry who may or may not stay mounted much of the time depending on leadership preference. All else equal, Striker units are superior for mission sets where massed infantry is key, including the defense and movement through restricted terrain or urban environments. Thus, the Striker, even the Striker Dragoon, shouldn't be considered a worse Bradley on wheels, and the Striker MGS shouldn't be thought of as a tank stand-in. These medium units provide the US Army with a particular capability that, when employed appropriately, can be superior to the behemoths with big sticks. If you like this look at Striker units, check out this video where we...
Alright, so that was actually quite interesting. I got to be honest, there's a lot of similarities there between the Canadian forces and the American forces. There's a lot of differences there too, but not enough differences to make, too much of a dichotomy between the two. It really does look like we do very similar jobs. So anyway, thanks for watching this video, guys. If you like it, please leave a like down below, leave a comment in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.